afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are around the world. On behalf of the organizers, the Berlin Institute for Public Theology, the Bayers Node Center for Public Theology, and the Lutheran World Federation, I'd like to welcome you to this online launch of the Open Access International Public Theology Resources. And today, our title for the session is Equipping Public Theologians for the Common Good. So welcome all of you, wherever you are coming from or signing in from. My name is Reverend Dr. Sivan Kit from the Lutheran World Federation. I'm very happy to moderate today's conversation on this important topic and also to guide us through the launch. So to start us going, just to remind us that the lecture series in the Open Access Resource revolves around the topic of public theology. And it brings together leading experts from around the world, delivering lectures in different aspects of public theology. And we are just so happy that we are able to launch this today. Now, to start us off, I'd like to invite the General Secretary of the Lutheran World Federation, Reverend Dr. Martin Junger. Really welcome you, Reverend Dr. Martin Junger. And I'd like to just give him the floor to just give us his keynote address and some reflections about today's event, and of course, the wider role of the church and religious communities in the public sphere. So over to you, Reverend Martin Junger.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. And indeed, this is a great day. It's a beautiful day, and it is an important day. And I'm so grateful for the joint work between the Berlin Institute for Public Theology, the Bayers Node Institute for Public Theology in South Africa, and the Lutheran World Federation, who are joining hands so that public theology resources are being made public, thereby reinforcing the claim of that role in the public space of the church. The notion of the public is currently under quite some pressure. Prevalent trends of individualization are leading to a disengagement from the public space. Humankind seems to be losing a sense of the common good. And where the sense of the common good gets lost, the common ground among people and communities shrinks as a consequence. And where both the common good gets lost and the common ground shrinks, eventually the common sense gets astray. And such are the times in which we seem to be living. The consequence is withdrawal, desolidarization, fragmentation, if not polarization and violence. Conspiracy theories abound. Communication breakdowns within families, within communities, among nations increase, because the logical frameworks out of which people and communities relate to each other are developing in secluded realities, in bubbles, often in online groups or groups of like-minded. Islands of splendid isolation, with a rich interior life and dialogue and process, yet with very little capability to relate to the outside, to connect to the other. Churches are not exempted from such trends, but churches are excellently well equipped to counter these trends if they only mobilize their spiritual and theological resources to do so. Because public theology is eventually a matter and an expression of faith. Indeed, faith is always personal. However, by nature, faith is never private, because faith both forms community and drives towards community. Jesus' famous word, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I will be in their midst, was never said as a word to offer consolation to parishes or congregations in view of poor worship attendance, as it is used sometimes. That word was offered as a seminal description of faith, as something that forms community, not something that undermines it. Faith, while a deeply personal matter, is at the same time public. For us in the Lutheran theological tradition, this public dimension inscribes itself in a theological principle that we cherish and apply, a configuration, if you want, so a grammar in our way of doing theology that stems from the act of God's incarnation in Jesus Christ. Incarnation. Incarnation is the phenomenal outreach of God to break out of the self-containment and make the rich Trinitarian relationship to become a gift to the whole world. God's incarnation is that huge step from heaven to earth, from the divine to the secular, from the godly to the human, from the non-created to the created world. There is a drive in God's incarnation in Christ towards the world, into the world. And as we saw it later in the life and the ministry of Jesus, deep into the public space, the weddings, the working realities of the peoples, the feasts and the suffering, the funerals, the hunger, the violence, all these realities that make up our life as human beings. In my view, the church is called into this divine tide towards humankind, into the world. And thereby it follows this dynamic set in motion by God, connecting realms hitherto disconnected, with the aim to bring wholeness and oneness to a world and humankind otherwise captive of their self-destructive ways. To me, a church withdrawing from the public space is a church running counter to that very motion that God put in place through and with Jesus Christ. A church withdrawing, running away from the evil world, has understood little of God, who so much loves world, up to offering God's own Son, so that all may find life in abundance. There is a public church, therefore, because of incarnation, requiring public theology, because of God's incarnation in Christ. A second principle I want to highlight before coming to an end is hope. A Latin American theologian wrote once, "For those who have seen the glimpses of the world that will come, it is impossible to conform with the world that is." This sentence has been very important to me. Christian faith has a horizon. Christian faith knows us of a future. Christian faith knows of a long history. It knows of the present day, but it knows also about a future, and knows, therefore, how the world will look like. That's, if you want, the spine in our flesh. We can't see the world anymore as it is, but we see it through the perspective of what will come. Justice, restored relations, shalom. And that spine in our flesh is called hope. Let me stop here, dear friends, congratulating us for this day where we come together to share resources, to put our hands together so that we equip people of faith to be in the public space in a responsible way. Thank you very much, and let's continue with this wonderful webinar.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Martin Junger, for your inspiring words and to encourage us to have a personal faith, but personal that's not private, but really engaging in the public space. So it's really a joy and pleasure to have you with us, and thank you for your encouragement. Now, of course, next we will have some opening remarks from our friends and colleagues from the World Reform Communion of Churches and also the World Council of Churches. But first, let me begin by inviting Reverend Philip Peacock. And he is the Acting General Secretary for Programs, World Communion of Reformed Churches. And he will just share some opening remarks from their perspective. So over to you, Philip.
Thank you very much, Sivan, and greetings to all of you where you may be in the world today. I think this is a very, very important initiative. Ever since modernity, faith, religion, and theology has increasingly been shrunk into the private sphere, where religion, faith, and theology are seen as something personal between one and the divine, excluding the public space. Capitalism has furthered this idea for its own benefit, of course, when it says that religion should be relegated to the private sphere and that religion itself lies outside the realm of economic life. Of course, the reason for this is that we should not bring ethics into the question of modern economics. However, for us as Christians and as people of faith, we believe in the sovereignty of God. If God is over all, then everything, all of life, comes under God. And this means our economic, social, political, and cultural systems as well. As people of faith, we cannot agree to the system of the market that deprives people from employment, from nutrition, from health, by just saying that business is business. Nor can we say that this is personal or something just between us, a matter of the family, and deny the violence that is exerted on women and people of marginal genders and sexualities. As feminists have reminded us, the personal is political and is therefore also theological. This idea that religion has a space in public life is, of course, central to the thinking of the Reformation. The Reformation was a movement against the initial forms of capitalism and resisted the commodification of life, the commodification of salvation. It said that salvation is by grace. It is not something that can be bought and sold. Neither can life be bought and sold. And therefore we find in the writings of Luther very strong words against the Fuggers, a banking family of his time, in which he says we should put a bit in the mouth of the Fuggers and rein them back. Calvin spoke very clearly and articulated very strongly that the economy should be directed towards the needs of the poor and the most vulnerable. Today, we find that emerging from the theologies of the oppressed, that these theologies offer an imagination of the construction of an alternative world, an alternative symbolic world, by saying, in the words that we pray, let your kingdom come, meaning let this kingdom pass away and let one that is based on justice come for us. And this sets a vision for transformation. The question then of a public theology, as we are reminded by the liberation theologian Juan Luis Segundo, is that it offers us an epistemological break. The question is not why is there suffering in the world, but rather what can we do about it? And this is, of course, a very public question. I would like to close, therefore, to bring all these ideas that I've presented to you in the very short time that Sivan has given me, in the words of the Accra Confession that we as the World Communion of Reformed Churches hold very dear to us. And I would like to read to you paragraphs 16, 17, 18, and 19. And this says, speaking from our Reformed tradition, and having read the Signs of the Times, the General Council of the World Alliance of Reformed Churches affirms that global economic justice is essential to the integrity of our faith in God and our discipleship as Christians. We believe that the integrity of our faith is at stake if we remain silent or refuse to act in the face of the current system of neoliberal economic globalization, and therefore we confess before God and one another. We believe in God, creator and sustainer of all life, who calls us as partners in the creation and redemption of the world. We live under the promise that Jesus Christ came so that we all might have life in its fullness. Guided and upheld by the Holy Spirit, we open ourselves to the reality of our world. We believe that God is sovereign over all creation. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Therefore, we reject the current world economic order imposed by global neoliberal capitalism and any other economic system, including absolute planned economies, which defy God's covenant by excluding the poor, the vulnerable, and the whole of creation from the fullness of life. We reject any claim of economic, political, and military empire which subverts God's sovereignty over life and act contrary to God's just rule. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Philip Peacock, for your opening remarks and challenging us also with those important words from the Accra Confession. So next, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Simone Sin to come to share with us. And she is speaking as the Academic Dean of the Ecumenical Institute at BOSE, World Council of Churches. And thank you so much for coming and sharing your thoughts about the resources and the broader work of public theology. Over to you. Thank you.
Greetings to all of you from the Ecumenical Institute at BOSE. It's a pleasure to be part of this webinar. First of all, I congratulate the Lutheran World Federation and its partners for developing this theological resource. Access to fresh and substantive theology is really very much needed in the global church. Of course, you can find many theological contributions on the internet, texts, videos, audio material. But what is needed is a collection that is presented in a meaningful and coherent way. So the collection that is being launched today is a precious and important resource for theological institutions and for churches, because it will help them to enter into deep discussions on the role of church and faith communities in relation to urgent concerns in society. Now, there are three reasons why I call this material on public theology a precious resource. First, it expands our theological imagination. Second, it sharpens our theological discernment. And third, it strengthens our theological commitment. So, expanding theological imagination. This is what is needed today. We need theologies to interact with one another and also to interact with different voices in society. We know that mentalities, ideologies, cultural perspectives clash or interfere with one another. Now, what we need is to enter into a dialogue that creates new imagination. Rooting ourselves back into our own traditions is one movement, but going out and listening to others and speaking to others and entering into that dialogical movement is most important for public theology. Now, this dialogical movement does not mean anything goes. Again, back to my second point, public theology sharpens theological discernment. The role of theology is to articulate the meaning of the gospel in our time, and this means critical engagement. Critical engagement from the perspective of the common good, or as we also say together with the Sustainable Development Goals, to leave no one behind. So it's really a comprehensive view on justice and peace. But this comprehensive view on justice and peace has a yardstick, and the yardstick is the well-being of the most vulnerable. So good public theology, in my view, expands the horizon, but it does so precisely by focusing our attention on the most vulnerable. Strengthening theological commitment. Theology is not a theoretical, but a practical discipline. Like medicine that is geared towards healing, or law that is geared towards justice, theology is geared towards communion in a very deep sense. Public theology comes out of experience and leads into experience. So what is needed today is a public theology that inspires, a theology that connects different perspectives, even contradicting perspectives, and engaging in a debate so that we are able to listen to different voices, but ultimately a theology that transforms. So for me, public theology is, in the 21st century, a liberating and empowering theology. And I have looked into a number of the videos that we launched today, and this is precisely what I find there. And I commit that I will share this with our students at WOSE, students from Orthodox, Roman Catholic, diverse Protestant and Pentecostal traditions. Thank you very much to the LWF for providing this resource.
Indeed, thank you, Simone, for your words of encouragement. Next, I would like to invite our partner, and in fact, in many ways, the initiator of this project, together with Bayersnode Center for Public Theology, my colleague from the Berlin Institute for Public Theology, Professor Thorstein Meres. Over to you to introduce the series and to share with us about the resource. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Sven. A warm welcome also from me to all of you. My name is Thorsten Meres. I teach systematic theology at Berlin's Humboldt University and serve as the director of the Berlin Institute for Public Theology. It's my task and honor today to introduce you to our lecture series. In the next 5 minutes, I'd like to briefly introduce the lecture series by telling its story, sketching an overview of the series, and by explaining design and use that we'd had in mind. It all started at one of the recent conferences of the Global Network for Public Theology when the topic of study material came up. While representatives from the Global South pointed out that affordable study material for their students are sometimes hard to come by, members from the Global North observed that perspectives from the Global South often aren't easy to obtain. Even though such views are direly needed for a theological decolonization and decentering in the global north. When Dion Foster and me talked this over with Sivin Kitt, he assured us that the availability of study material is a major issue among the members of the Lutheran World Federation too, especially under conditions of a global pandemic. And I think what Martin Junge, Philip Peacock, and Simone Sin have said endorses this. So we got together last year in June, devising and planning a virtual lecture series supposed to bring together leading experts in the field of public theology from the global south and the global north. Most of them, but by no means all of them, are Christians, as the topic of public theology crosses not only national, but also religious boundaries. The contributors were to deliver short and accessible, but also concise lectures on a variety of issues, thus mapping the field of public theology in an introductory, but also comprehensive fashion. When we sent out our call, we were overwhelmed by the positive responses from scholars all over the world. The lecture series that emerged consists of 3 parts. The first part deals with theoretical and conceptual issues. After an introductory collection of public theology stories from Asia, Africa, the Americas, and Europe, basic concepts and perspectives are addressed. In which way is public theology rooted in biblical exegesis? What is meant by the public? What by theology? What does public theology look like in an Islamic perspective? And others more. A second part then is dedicated to material questions addressed by public theology. What's the role of religion in politics? How do creation and sustainable development relate? In which way does public theology address the question of peace and conflict? Is it compatible with the theology of liberation? A concluding third part then brings different scholars together for a discursive exchange of perspective. Technically, all lectures are available free of charge and designed to be accessible on computer or smartphone. You've already seen in the chat the links where you can get those lectures. Each lecture exists in 2 formats, devised to accommodate different connectivities. If a fairly good internet access is available, there's a video lecture on YouTube consisting of a short introduction of the scholar in question and the lecture proper, usually with a slide presentation. Additionally, there's a small portable document file with discussion questions, recommendations for further study, and references, which we call a task sheet. If the data rate is less good, there's a much smaller audio file, which may be downloaded, a PDF file containing the slide presentation, and again, the task sheet, which also sports a table showing which part of the audio file relates to which slide. Where data rates are generally poor and students don't have access to smartphones or computers, teaching institutions may address us directly and receive the whole package free of charge to present to their students on site. The lectures are at this moment hosted and available at the Berlin Institute for Public Theology, the Beas Nordia Center for Public Theology, and of course, the Lutheran World Federation. We've already put the links into the chat for easy accessibility. Let me close with a few words of thanks. It might bear mentioning here that none of the contributors received any money for their efforts. Huge thanks to all of you, but especially to Dion and Sivin, who worked tirelessly to make this possible. I'd also like to thank the Theological Faculty of the Humboldt University zu Berlin, whose Graduate Center financed the technical support for the lecture series, which was provided first to postgraduates at Berlin and Stellenbosch. And of course, technical support is personal. It has a face and a voice. And so I'd like to thank Miriam Keller, who should appear in the chat briefly. Yes, I hope you can all see her. She did the great work of putting together the often very disparate formats and files into a coherent video or audio file, in making audio files and slides compatible and assembling task sheets, sometimes from scratch. By the way, it's her voice you hear announcing the title at the beginning of every video and audio file. Last not least, I'd like to thank all the great participating institutions, especially the Lutheran World Federation, who helped to disseminate this knowledge. Before we present you with a short medley of some of the lectures intended as a teaser to whet your appetite for the lectures proper, and assembled by Sivin Kit during a weekend of hard labor, I'd like to stress one important thing. This is only a start. We are very aware that we've only begun to cover this field, that there are surely a lot of blind spots left to be discovered and discussed. 20 lectures are by no means enough to grasp the wide variety of public theology in a global perspective. And there remain many voices that should be heard. So we'd like to encourage scholars and practitioners of public theology from all over to continue in this effort. But now let me direct your attention on our glimpses from the lecture series, Public Theology, an International and Intercontextual Assessment.
Welcome to the lecture series of Public Theology.
I realized the importance of giving expression to the Christian faith in a language that not only speaks to the church, but also to the wider public, taking into consideration the challenges that are faced by Christians in a society.
What is this affinity between white evangelicals and right-wing populism about? Doctrine alone won't suffice as an answer. After all, evangelicals of color and evangelicals in other countries share much doctrine with white American evangelicals, but come to quite different political positions.
So church leaders, mostly when they are talking about public theology, they feel the engagement of the church, of church leaders and other religious organizations, be they Christians or otherwise, policy formations, critique of bad policies, issues of moral regeneration, and then the issue of economic recovery and the plight of the poor, especially those in IDP camps.
One of the most controversial issues of public theology in Germany in the last years has been the Church's stand on search and rescue missions for refugees in the Mediterranean. The Church's involvement in search and rescue operations is a concrete case of practiced public theology, which is certainly worth to be analyzed and controversially discussed.
That the public theologian is living in the world as it is, but is called to imagine the world as to be otherwise, thus helping people to see beyond their current circumstances, marred by the effects of violence and injustice.
One could, for example, claim that public theology is theology that matters, theology that makes a difference in the ways in which people live in their communities, societies, our global world together.
Muslims are required both to engage with the world and change it. The Quran repeatedly asks Muslims both to change themselves and to constantly strive to change the world so that it could become a more just, equitable and peaceful abode for humanity.
Why must we not lose sight of black theology of liberation, even though we are having a conversation about public theology?
My research interests are public theology, theological hermeneutics, and digital theology, and I'm glad to introduce you today into the relation of the digital spaces, and public theology.
Giving a perspective into peacemaking from my own experience as a Palestinian who has been living in this land for all my life. And inspired not just by my faith, but also from my activism related to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
I teach feminist ethics and public theology because discrimination and violence against women and girls is widespread. Moreover, theology has taught complementarianism and the submission of women, and public theology needs to challenge this.
Our faith is not a private faith. Our faith is a public faith. So it needs to engage the public. It needs to be taken to the public sphere. We need to begin to see how we can collapse the sacred circular divide that causes us to watch evil being perpetuated without doing anything.
So most of the time in a society,
especially during some kind of political crisis. People are always asking where the church is, where God is.
And I soon realized that that's not only issue of conflict and peace building, but I think it's in many ways most aspect of our life. When you talk about the common good, the overcoming polarization in our political life, economic life, and social life.
So the question of what it means to be at home, what it means to be a migrant, what it means to experience racism, what it means to be welcomed into a host church and to belong in a host church as an equal. And as I began to explore these questions, the public dimensions of these questions became more and more clear.
And some said, no, we can go back and do our real business and just be church. Nelson Mandela is liberated, so leave the political terrain to the politicians. And we soon discovered, oh no, that's not the gospel imperative. We need to be present, and the notion of public theology encourages us to go spread not the virus, but spread the gospel to all publics of life.
So that's a glimpse of the lecture series, and I'd like to invite some of the contributors to come. I invited them to join us for a little conversation. And we have Rodney Chaka, Professor Rodney Chaka, and also we have Reverend Dr. Sephrosa Carroll from the World Council of Churches, and we have Professor Dr. Frederica van Oorschot, the Director of Department of Religion and Law and Culture from Heidelberg University. Professor Dr. Rodney, he's actually from the University of South Africa, and it's just wonderful to have three of you kind of representing part of the contributors. There are others who are actually here with us and they are commenting in the chat. So I just want to start off by asking, why do you think this is important, the discussion on public theology, and what motivated you to be part of the series? And I'd like to start with you, Rodney, because you said, you're bringing in the perspective of Black theology of liberation, but we're having a conversation of public theology. So you kind of like raised the question. Maybe you can give us some thoughts as we hear from others too.
So, Seven, I think first and foremost is just once again to also congratulate this initiative that has brought us together here. I think we are acknowledging the fact that that there are different public theologies. I mean, even the network of public theology does give that impression. But I think it's very important that we also understand the particular context out of which a particular theology, public theology emerges. In the context of South Africa, I insist that there is a need to acknowledge a critical conversation that precedes public theology, in that Black theology of liberation has always been public theology in a time when it was not fashionable to speak publicly about your faith. And so that's why we tend to tease by saying there is nothing that public theology is saying today that Black theology has not said loudly in the past. But saying that also, there are other dimensions that we have to once again acknowledge in that space. And that's why a conversation that speaks to what we're supposed to do as Christians in the public is very important, because it cuts across race, it cuts across gender. And that's why I think it's important that we have this conversation.
Thank you. That's a good way into this. And of course, maybe we go from where Rodney is located to somewhere really further, or at least where you came from, Sephrosa. And you mentioned in your particular contribution in our roundtable discussion that you are a reluctant public theologian, or reluctant to engage in this conversation. So share with us your thoughts in this contribution.
Yeah, but I guess, as the Spirit works in mysterious ways, you kind of get pushed into areas that widen your discomfort. It's a good thing. I grew up in a context where, private and public were very distinct separations, and where faith lived primarily in the private sphere. So basically, Sunday is when faith happens. Every other day of the week is separate from faith. So I guess for me, it just became very important to actually unpack the connections between private and the public, between how your faith is, yes, private, but it also has a very public nature to it. And so part of that journey was is to enable people to make those connections in the hope that when people have their aha moments, it leads to transformative action, that it will inspire a different way of being in the world and also critically engaging in the world. So that's why I think public theology is important. And I think for me, Simone encapsulates that very clearly in her 3 points about expanding theological imagination, strengthening theological discernment, and also theological action, which is very important. I guess why I got involved in this process, the big thing for me is I come from the public south, I'm originally from the Pacific, is accessibility of the resources, because I come from a context where it is very difficult to get good resources in theological colleges. And it's a context that desperately needs to understand and unpack why faith is public.
And thank you, Sefrosa. And nowadays, a lot of things that we're trying to do, of course, this is slightly a more confined space we have in Zoom, but it is a kind of a digital space. And I guess now I'm turning to Federica, because your contribution was really about the digital space and related to what so many of us are experiencing now, engaging the public in that space. So would you share about your experience in this, contributing to this series as well?
Well, thank you so much, Steven. Well, I worked on the global aspects on public theology since my dissertation. And what I see in my context, the Western German context, is that there's a lot of talking about other voices. And what really struck me about this project is that you can hear and listen and get invited to really engage with different voices in public theology. And especially for my field, digital publics, it's a desperate need in thinking globally about how digital spaces shape our understanding of public, how our digital spaces shape our interaction between Christians and even our theological discourse. And this is something I try to stress. So for me, it was kind of a way of making theology public, or maybe even making publicly theology, doing theology in public, as we do now, using a digital space, bringing people together, getting into conversation. And I really love being part of that.
Yeah, I just want to pick up some of the things that our participants are asking. Of course, there are a lot of, I think the Asians here are asking a lot about the Asian perspective. Now, of course, we have to admit this was done during a time of pandemic, and of course, it is meant to be a starting point and not an end point. It is not a definitive answer to all things public theology. There are contributions from the Middle East. There are contributions from Asia, like at least Hong Kong. But of course, we know that there's probably much more also going on around the world. So we'd like to invite you to continue to add to your voice and just contact us or just and contribute and let us know the contributions that are around your areas too. And so I'm turning back to the panelists now, just hearing from you. Now, what do you hope people will gain from this resource? And maybe part of it I've already articulated is that we hope more people will contribute their voice. And of course, there might be tensions and contradictions, or at least you would say challenges to each other in how we express ourselves in this. And this is rightly happening even in the chat as we speak. What are your thoughts in people? What do you want people to gain from it or inspired to do from this resource? Maybe I want to go first, or maybe I'll go back to Rodney. It doesn't have to go one round, but feel free to chip in.
Well, Steven, as indicated earlier, one hope that first this can become a resource. But more importantly, in my context and in the context of South Africa, I'm hoping that those who are interested in this conversation will understand the dimensions that are at work also in this. We are in a context where, and once again, because of our struggle against apartheid, Black and white scholars engage in the subject quite differently. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that we need to have a conversation that we have not had in the past, so that we are cleared of the hermeneutics of suspicion around this. There's a sense that public theology is more inclusive in that it does not speak to the race question, and therefore people are quite comfortable to rally around it because it sort of skirts issues of race, and there are a number of other issues as well. So that's why I think context is important, in that in the case of South Africa, what are the contextual issues that has produced a public theology that is yet to have a sincere conversation with Black theology, with feminist theology, and so on and so forth.
Indeed, the race question is important. And I think that was mentioned also, Sephirosa, in your quote. You mentioned about that. What does it mean to deal with racism and so on? So do you have any thoughts about what Rodney said, or your own reflections of how people will be challenged to think as they look at these resources with new eyes?
Sorry, I really hope that the resources inspire people to engage. I hope, and I know that it will inform and expand people's imaginations, but also deepen their understanding of faith and how it relates to public life and the issues within their own context. And I hope that it will encourage them to deepen solidarity with not only Christians, but non-Christians within their context. For example, although I was born and grew up in the Pacific, Australia is also another home for me. And, up until the 1960s, Christianity, the term Christianity was synonymous with religion. So when we said religion, we thought Christianity, that was just kind of the understanding. But with the onset of migration and multiculturalism and the mixed public space, what Christians found is that they were one voice among many. And then all of a sudden, they didn't know quite how to deal with it, because there's a very strong sense that of understanding of evangelism as conversion. So, for me, the series, and I think, Rodney, you talked about there are many public theologies. It's theologies, not theology. So these, I hope that people will be inspired, but also deepen in their understanding, knowledge, and also faith, that they will actually develop the kind of language also and skills that Martin referred to as they engage in the public space. And, the big hope is that it leads to a different kind of world, of which we privilege the marginalized.
Thank you, Sephirosa. Friederike, I can see that you wanted to jump in. Go ahead.
I wanted to jump in this conversation, stressing again the aspect of media, the media we use, because thinking about exclusion in the theological discourse, I would say the access to theological fields, and that we, as you described it, Torsten said it earlier, that we don't have access to the voices from other parts of the world in the very theological debates. For me is a problem of my understanding public theology. So creating an open access free account of theological resources for me really is a theological adequate form of a theology who calls itself public. So there was really a point for me, and I tried to strengthen this in my lecture a little more, why I think that we should really use the possibilities of the digital media on that more. And what I hope for is that we start a discussion like we start in the chat now, so that we see each other, get to know each other a little, then we can write an email. We have the WhatsApp phone numbers in here, so that we really can get in touch with one another, because this is something I think in the theological discourse is really much needed.
Indeed, in some sense, like Rodney said, of course, there are limitations and challenges that public theologians or those who engage in this work need to take on, especially issues of race, etc. But on the other hand, it's also an open door to invite us to have this deeper engagement and conversation together. There are various questions that the participants you have raised, and I think Miriam very well, she has already pointed you to some of the lectures that actually talk about the definitions of public theology and what is public in theology, what is the theology side. But of course, we may be in danger of just limiting ourselves to argue about definitions and concepts, because at the end of the day, it's about lived realities. And so I'm just wondering, how do you see the church or Christians or even friends from other faiths? Some of them are present here with us, and they have contributed at least to this discussion. How do you see us could move forward, of all of us who are interested in this, to engage constructively in the public space, either using this material or contributing even more? Anyone would like to just put that in? Especially someone said, is this something that someone said about evangelicals, not just for mainline churches, but a discussion amongst us in the mainline church, but it's also part of the evangelical discussion or Pentecostal charismatic traditions. Anyone would like to chip into that?
So
go ahead, Rodney.
You see, well, I think I must admit that I'm actually a sucker for conversation. I think if there's anything that is able to mobilize faith communities, it is to enable conversation to be a constant factor. As a minister part-time, I have learned that there are communal things that motivate people across faith, their faith, and so these are the things that would make the church to be, once again, that community that is trusted. Because if you look across the globe, you find that even the church itself seems to have abandoned really the fact that it is selective, in that it has to identify with those on the margins of society. You get churches that are hell-bent of trying to be friends with the hegemonies and really relegating that relationship and responsibility to something else. So I'm saying once we stop having conversations, we are not going to get very far with regards to what changes can be brought about in the different localities that we find ourselves in.
Thank you, Rodney. Others? Sefrosa?
Yeah, well, I'm a sucker for conversations as well. I mean, we do this really well in the Pacific, right? We have a talanoa, and there's a whole methodology around it. But this is what I imagine and that's why, I was part of this process because of the accessibility, in that, because it's digital, it's also free, which means that people can have access to it. Although I do want to table a comment that came up, that, what about those who don't have accessibility to digital kind of, have digital access? So that's something we have to remember and park at the back of our minds. But one of the things I think that these resources can do is it can bring people together for intentional dialogue and create the spaces that is needed to ask the difficult questions, to sometimes say the non-political correct things, and not be afraid. Because I think it's when you stand on somebody's toes and they go, ouch, do you realize that, oh, I hurt that person? So I think it's, hopefully these resources can be used in such a way, whether it's in the classroom, in the community, to bring people together for conversation and for learning. And I think that encounters are really important things. That's how you learn and grow. You don't just learn from a textbook. You actually learn from engaging and encountering one another in spaces and in meetings. So, and the other thing I think these resources also do is, and going by the chat, is that it raises more questions. So, you just kind of, keep going. My only plea is, please do not just stay in the dialogical space, because we have to move out of that somehow into the world to actually be involved in real action.
Exactly. And before we kind of wrap up on the real action bit, which is very important, this is a public theology in practice, and it needs to be practiced out in the public. If it's not, then it's just about us talking in public, but not changing anything. And today's theme is really equipping public theologians, with the S, for the common good. So it needs to have that end. And Frederica, any thoughts about the constructive use of the material and broader reflections before we wrap up? And I'll pass the time to Dion very soon.
Well, I just can underline whatever was said before about having conversations. And I want to just highlight another aspect Simone Sin just said. I really much liked her talking about expanding theological imagination, because this is something discussion can do and getting in contact can do. And this is something I think we need to start to imagine about different actions. And I like that we have very different views on these actions needed in the different parts of the world we are in. So I think starting that will be the best we can do. And I personally will use it for teaching, so that my students not only hear me talking about different global perspectives on something, but have the possibility to listen to other people, maybe invite other people to our seminars and starting conversation in a real direct part.
So yeah, thank you very much, all three of you, for just kind of like representing part of the contributors. There are many actually in the chat, and some have already offered to contribute and point us to people who can contribute further. So it sounds like we are being nudged into going through a part 2, a sequel to this work. But let's pause for a moment and just use whatever we have now, and then of course draw more. And at the end, it's not just about conversation, it's really about action. And the ultimate goal is to see transformation in the world. And thank you for your contribution, Rodney, Sefrosa, and Frederica, into the series. And on behalf of Berlin Institute for Public Theology and the Bayes Node Center for Public Theology and the LWF, we want to thank you for joining us for this kind of like informal yet formal conversation about this. And once again, thank you so much. Next, I would like to invite my colleague, Dion Foster, to come, and I'd like to pass him the closing remarks. Of course, we see many questions raised, and it was not our goal to answer all the questions, but to actually start the conversation, encourage people to look at the resources, and it seems that part of that goal is being fulfilled even as we launch this material. So I would like to pass the time to you to give us a call to action in many ways, give us an altar call in that sense. I know you're coming from the Methodist tradition, and share with us some thoughts to wrap us up as we close this online launch. And once again, thank you for the panelists and our speakers for sharing with us. Over to you, Dion.
Sivan, thanks so much. And it's been absolutely wonderful to listen to the buzz of interest and to see so many people joining us today for this launch of this wonderful resource, Equipping Public Theologians for the Common Good. And I just want to begin my wrap up by saying a huge word of thanks to you, Reverend Dr. Sivan Kitt, to our colleague, Professor Dr. Torsten Meireis, and to Ms. Miriam Keller for the magnificent work that you've done in keeping us all on track. Friends, there have been many meetings and many problem-solving sessions to bring us to this point. And of course, we want to say a huge word of thank you to each and every one of the contributors. I think that you will find when you watch those 21 videos that some of the people whose books we've only ever read are so generously represented in this work. And we hope that you're going to find this resource to be an important kickoff for your own conversations, thoughts, and work in public theology. And I also just want to say a huge word of thanks to the Lutheran World Federation, to the Humboldt University of Berlin, the Berlin Institute for Public Theology that's there, and of course my colleagues in the Bayes Node Center for Public Theology for adding finances and the resources of persons to make this project possible. Now, when you watch the videos, you're going to see that this is deliberately not a polished production. We undertook it during the height of the COVID pandemic, and we encouraged folks to record in the ways that all of us learned to work. We encouraged people to record on their laptops, on their smartphones, and you're going to see that the content of the videos was far more important than the lighting or the audio. And so please be patient with that and take out of every video what you can get. Then also just a gentle little disclaimer to say that, of course, the views represented in these videos represent the views of the participants themselves. and none of the institutions involved are formally represented by the views. And of course, we encourage you to differ, to ask questions, and even to join the conversation by making your own contributions. Now, just to say, as of 4 p.m. today, all of the resources are available on the 3 websites of the institutions that we mentioned, the Lutheran World Federation's website, the Berlin Institute for Public Theology, and the Bayers Nodia Center for Public Theology. And what you'll find there are the videos, links to download the audio, the PowerPoint slides, as well as the teaching guides, if you want to use those. And as we recognize, not everybody has access to online internet access all of the time. And so you'll see I've just posted a link into the chat, and we encourage you, if you would like to get a full copy of the digital resources, the video, the audio, the slides, and the task sheets, then please just complete this form, and we'll make sure to get a copy to you that you can use in offline mode. So friends, this is the start of a process. It's by no means the end. And we would be very, very happy if we saw you using these resources, sharing them, building on them, using them to start conversations, and even surpassing them. So thank you for joining us today. And we hope that you will find the resources helpful and useful, and all of the best and many blessings to you as you witness to the goodness of God's love, to the power and transformation of God's Spirit, and to the life that comes through God, our parent in the church. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Dion, for your closing words. And indeed, we, the 3 of us, have really enjoyed working together. And we enjoyed working with all the contributors. And we want to thank you for those of the contributors who are present with us for today. And this marks the end of the online launch, but in many ways, a transition into more work that needs to be done. So I'd like to thank all of the participants for your comments and your questions. In fact, those questions are really good for us to gather to find ways, and others who can address those questions as well. So we really appreciate that. And just wanted to once again say thank you to everyone, and we will see you soon, and let us stay in touch. Once again, goodbye and stay safe, everyone. May God's blessings be with you.